There are cruel rulers, there are tyrants, and then there are the emperors of ancient Rome, men who wielded absolute power, answered to no one, and lived in a world where their whims could decide the fate of thousands. But among all the Caesars known for violence, paranoia, and excess, one ruler stands out as something else entirely, a man who took human suffering and turned it into a public spectacle. A man who transformed punishment into performance, a man who made execution entertainment. This is the unbelievable, disturbing story of the Roman emperor who blurred the line between justice and amusement, and whose taste for cruelty became one of the most infamous chapters in all of Roman history. For most people today, the Colosseum brings to mind gladiator battles, roaring crowds, and the glory of Rome, but what many forget is that the Colosseum and the arenas that came before it also served another purpose. They were Rome's stage for the ultimate punishment, public execution. And for one emperor in particular, these executions were not just a tool of justice. They were a form of theater. To understand how this happened, we need to step back into a world that feels almost unreal today, the early Roman Empire, where one man rose to power surrounded by grandeur, wealth, and absolute authority. That man was the emperor known as Caligula. Caligula's birth name was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. He belonged to a powerful military family, adored by the Roman legions. As a child, he followed his father, the general Germanicus, on campaigns and wore a tiny set of soldiers' boots. The soldiers affectionately called him Caligula, meaning little boots. What no one knew then was that this small nickname would one day be attached to one of Rome's most notorious rulers. When Caligula became emperor in 37 CE, Rome celebrated wildly. He was young, charismatic, and carried the goodwill of his father's legacy. Crowds cheered him. Senators praised him. He was seen as a fresh start after the stern and often harsh rule of Tiberius. For the first few months, Caligula lived up to expectations. He freed wrongfully imprisoned Romans, reduced taxes, and granted bonuses to the military. People thought a golden age had arrived, but then everything changed. Modern historians debate what caused Caligula's sudden descent into instability, an illness, deep trauma, or the corrupting influence of unlimited power. Whatever the cause, the man who emerged after those first months was almost unrecognizable. The cheerful young ruler became erratic, paranoid, and fascinated with control. He demanded to be worshipped as a living god. He humiliated senators, confiscated property, and executed people for minor offenses. And it was during this transformation that Caligula developed one of his darkest interests, turning executions into entertainment. In Rome, public executions were not new. Criminals, traitors, and enslaved people who rebelled had long been punished in the amphitheater. But Caligula elevated execution to something else entirely. He treated it as spectacle, not justice. He inserted himself into the process, choosing victims on a whim and watching with delight as punishments unfolded. What had once been the final step in the legal system became, under Caligula, something closer to a performance, and he was the director. One Roman writer recorded that Caligula often ordered executions during lavish feasts. Imagine it, senators, priests, and nobles reclining on couches, enjoying fine wine and roasted meats, and then Caligula, smiling casually, signaling for a condemned prisoner to be brought in. While the guests watched in terror, the sentence was carried out. Not in a courtroom, not in a prison, but right there, in the middle of the banquet, as though it were part of the evening's entertainment. Caligula thought it was amusing. He believed it kept his guests obedient. It reminded them that he alone controlled life and death. But the emperor did not stop there. When he attended games in the arena, he often demanded that the schedule be rearranged to include executions at moments he found most entertaining. If the crowd grew bored, he would order more prisoners to be brought out. If a spectacle wasn't thrilling enough, he demanded a harsher setup. He even replaced intermissions, breaks meant for rest, with sudden, unscheduled punishments so that the public never relaxed. For Caligula, the amphitheater was a playground where he could display his power and satisfy his impulses. One story tells of a day when the arena ran out of condemned criminals to execute. Instead of ending the show early, Caligula reportedly ordered his guards to grab people from the audience. ordinary citizens who had shown up to watch. Whether the story is exaggerated or not, Romans of the time believed it. And the fact that it sounded believable says everything about how Caligula was viewed. Unpredictable, terrifying, and dangerously impulsive. Another account describes how Caligula liked to walk among prisoners before they were punished, speaking to them casually, as if chatting with acquaintances. But his last words to them were often a cruel joke, something like, "Don't worry, if you die, I'll take care of your families," spoken with a grin. The cruelty wasn't just in the punishment itself, but in the psychological games he played with his victims. For Caligula, executions were not simply a tool of fear. They were a part of his daily life, something he used to show dominance, provoke reactions, and amuse himself. In a world where he believed he was equal to the gods, ending lives became a casual pastime. But perhaps the most infamous example of Caligula's obsession with punishment was his treatment of people he disliked. If someone annoyed him, a senator who disagreed, a poet who criticized him, even a guest who yawned during one of his speeches, Caligula could order their execution on the spot. And if he was feeling particularly theatrical, he made sure it happened publicly, so everyone could witness the consequences of displeasing the emperor. Roman historians wrote that Caligula sometimes staged elaborate scenes, creating scenarios where the condemned person was humiliated before the punishment began. These were not random acts of violence, but staged performances meant to entertain and terrify. But Caligula's greatest demonstration of cruelty came in the form of unpredictability. Romans lived in constant fear because they never knew when or why he might choose someone as the next victim. A laugh, a facial expression, a rumor, anything could spark his interest. And when it did, another execution would be added to the day's program. Caligula's rule became so chaotic that even Rome, a society accustomed to harsh punishments, grew terrified. Senators whispered that they were next. Soldiers feared his temper. Families prayed that the emperor would never notice them. The empire was drowning in paranoia. But like all tyrants who pushed too far, Caligula made enemies. Senators, guards, and even members of his personal protection force conspired against him. And in 41 CE, after less than 4 years of rule, Caligula was assassinated by members of the Praetorian Guard, the very soldiers meant to protect him. His death was sudden, violent, and fueled by the anger of men who had watched him tear Rome apart. The empire breathed a sigh of relief. The Senate tried to restore the Republic. The people, who once celebrated him with flowers and cheers, now told stories of his cruelty to warn future generations. Caligula's obsession with execution as entertainment became one of the most infamous aspects of his legacy. It showed the world what happens when absolute power is placed in the hands of someone who values fear over justice, spectacle over humanity. It revealed a dark truth about ancient Rome. Even a civilization known for engineering, law, and culture could be guided by one man's darkest impulses. But Caligula's story raises a haunting question. Why did so many people watch? Part of the reason was fear. No one dared oppose the emperor or criticize his actions, especially in public. If Caligula wanted executions during dinner, the guests pretended not to be horrified. If he wanted someone punished in the arena, the crowd cheered along, terrified of being next. But another part of the answer lies in Roman culture itself. The Romans were raised in a world where public punishments were normal, where violence was entertainment, and where the line between justice and spectacle was already thin. Caligula merely pushed an existing system to its extreme. After his death, Rome continued its tradition of arena shows and public punishments, but no emperor ever again embraced the role of execution entertainer the way Caligula did. His behavior became a warning, a reminder of how fragile civilization is when power is unchecked. Today, Caligula remains a symbol of madness, cruelty, and the dangers of absolute authority. But his story also reveals something deeper about human nature. When leaders cross moral boundaries, when violence becomes normalized, and when suffering becomes entertainment, societies can lose their sense of humanity without even realizing it. Caligula's reign was short, but its shadow is long. And the idea of an emperor turning executions into entertainment continues to fascinate and horrify the modern world, because we cannot help but wonder, If someone like Caligula rose to power today, with access to modern technology, global media, and millions of watching eyes, what would he do? And would the world stop him?